Dear viewers of the Soul Stories channel, welcome back to a tale spun from rain, fate, and the kind of love that stumbles in unexpected storms. Today we bring you a romance that begins not with roses, but with thunder. So settle in, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because the next story could be yours. Rain lashed against the windshield like it was trying to erase the world, turning everything beyond Grace Miller's view into a gray blur. Her GPS had quit working a few turns ago, abandoning her to the winding roads of Greenwich, Connecticut. She was navigating purely by faith in the faint glow of house numbers under dim street lamps. It was close to midnight, and exhaustion weighed on her like a soaked coat. Her navy blazer clung to her like a second skin, drenched and heavy, but the stack of gala paperwork on her passenger seat had to be delivered tonight. Hayes Corporation was counting on it, and her boss's words still echoed, sharp and stern. "No mistakes, Grace. This client is everything." She cursed under her breath as she rolled to a stop in front of what she hoped was the right villa. The building loomed through the storm, sleek and modern with towering windows, its warm interior lights barely denting the darkness outside. The house number was nearly impossible to make out, smeared by rain, but it matched, at least mostly, the scrawl in her notepad. Snatching the paperwork, she tucked it under her coat and bolted for the entrance, heels slipping on slick stone. The cold was bone deep, but she pressed forward, jaw clenched, desperate to be done and home. Inside the house, Eric Hayes sat motionless in a darkened room, a half-empty whiskey bottle catching the light from a low lamp. The shadows clung to the edges of the room, leaving only his face illuminated, handsome but hollowed out by grief. In his hand was an old photo, edges frayed, of a woman with a soft smile and wind-tangled dark hair. Elena, his wife. 2 years gone, ripped from his life in a flash of metal and screaming tires. He stared at her image as if it could speak back. The whiskey seared his throat, but not the ache in his heart. A sharp knock echoed through the villa, followed by another, louder one. Eric didn't move. Outside, Grace banged on the door, hair dripping, skin chilled to the bone. With no answer, she frowned, then tried the handle. To her surprise, it turned. "Hello?" she called, voice echoing off marble floors as she stepped inside. The entryway felt more like a gallery, cold, sterile, intimidating. Everything gleamed. Rain dripped from her coat as she stepped forward. "I'm from Starline Events," she said louder, her voice wavering slightly from the cold. "I have the gala files." In the dim living room, Eric froze mid-sip. That voice, not the words, just the sound of it. Software, sure. It struck something dormant inside him. He set the glass down, stood unsteadily, and walked into the hallway. His tall frame cut a dark silhouette in the warm light. And there she was, soaked, shivering, dark hair clinging to her face, eyes sharp and wary. His breath hitched, his heart slammed against his ribs. She looked like her, so much like her. Elena. Without thought, he stepped closer, emotion surging. Grace turned, expecting a staff member or assistant. Instead, a man emerged, a commanding presence in a wrinkled white shirt, sleeves rolled high over muscular forearms. His eyes locked onto hers like she was the last real thing in the world. Something wild stirred behind them, and before she could react, he crossed the space between them. "Elena," he breathed, voice breaking on the name. His hand rose, trembling, fingertips brushing her cheek, cold and reverent. "I've missed you." She froze. The name hit her like a slap. "Elena? What?" She opened her mouth, but then his lips crashed onto hers, desperate, aching, rough with sorrow. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't right. It was raw, a man clinging to memory. For a moment she stood stunned by the heat of him, the grief pouring off him like the storm outside. Then fury overtook her. She shoved him with all her strength, hand flying to slap him across the face. The sound echoed. "Don't you ever touch me!" she screamed, voice splintering, her entire body quaking. Eric staggered backward, her handprint burning on his cheek. The fog of whiskey and longing evaporated in an instant. He stared at her, shaken. I thought," he mumbled, but the words withered. He could see clearly now. This wasn't Elena. could never be Elena. And yet, the resemblance had caught him off guard, tore open something inside him. "Stay away," Grace snapped, gripping the documents like armor. She didn't care who he was or what ghosts haunted him. She had boundaries. She spun, stormed toward the door, feet skidding on wet marble. The rain swallowed her as she reached her car, hands trembling, fingers fumbling with the keys. She slid into the driver's seat, slammed the door, started the engine, and drove into the night without a backward glance. Her heart pounded, a cocktail of rage and confusion pulsing in her veins. But one thing she knew: this would not define her. She wouldn't let one strange encounter with a broken man unravel her. She was done. The city would bury this moment. He would never see her again. Inside the villa, Eric stood stunned, the sting on his cheek grounding him like a whip crack. The room now felt emptier than ever, silence pressing against his chest. He collapsed onto the couch, hands tangled in his hair. That wasn't Elena. He'd crossed a line and shame pooled in his stomach. What the hell had he done? Grief wasn't a license to lose control. Still, her eyes haunted him, defiant, burning, not soft like Elena's, but fierce. It stirred something old and forgotten. Not love, but something. He reached for the photo of Elena again, running his finger over her faded smile. But this time, her image didn't hold him. His mind wandered to the woman who had fled, the stranger. He didn't even know her name, but her presence lingered like smoke. The sound of her slap, the fire in her voice. She wasn't Elena, not even close. Yet she jolted him awake in a way whiskey and grief never could. Who was she? Why couldn't he stop thinking about her? The thought was like a spark in a long, cold room. Across the river in Brooklyn, Grace stepped into her apartment, peeling off her sodden clothes and stepping under a scorching shower. The water steamed around her as she scrubbed hard, furious with herself, with him, with the night. Her lips still tingled with the ghost of his kiss, and it made her sick. Who the hell did he think he was? And who was Elena? Some dead wife? Some ex? She didn't care. She wasn't anyone's echo, and she wouldn't fall apart over some stranger's mistake. Wrapped in a towel, she collapsed onto her couch, the files she'd nearly forgotten dumped on the coffee table. She'd dropped them back at the house in the chaos, but she wasn't going back. Tomorrow she'd tell her boss it was done, and as far as she was concerned, that man didn't exist anymore. New York was huge. She'd never see him again. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to forget. But his face kept surfacing. That broken voice, those gray eyes, that pain. No excuse. It didn't matter. But still, she dreamed. Somewhere else in the city, Eric lay wide awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling. For 2 years, his sorrow had been a locked room. But now something had shifted. It wasn't lighter, not yet, but it had changed shape. A door creaked open inside him. He didn't know why, couldn't explain it. But the woman who just stormed into his home, into his grief, and into his mind, she'd stirred up everything he thought he'd buried. And now he couldn't stop thinking about her. Kissed her under the wrong name, not the arrogant executive, but someone carrying a grief that hadn't healed. Grace stood frozen for a moment, her bag slung over her shoulder, then gave a curt nod and left the room, heart confused, mind rebelling against the swirl of sympathy threatening her resolve. That night, Grace lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She hated how his words replayed in her head, how her pulse reacted not with anger, but with an aching curiosity. What pain was he hiding behind those storm gray eyes? Why had he called her Elena? And why, despite everything, did she feel drawn to him like a wave to the shore against her better judgment? Meanwhile, Eric sat alone in his penthouse, the city glowing beneath him. The silence was heavy. He poured himself a glass of scotch but didn't drink it. Instead, he opened a drawer and took out an old photo. Elena, laughing on a beach, hair flying, eyes full of life. His thumb brushed over the image, then he placed it face down. Grace Miller had a fire Elena never did, a sharpness, a spine. But something in her gaze stirred memories and emotions he thought he'd buried. He whispered to the empty room, "What the hell are you doing to me, Grace?" The days moved fast as the gala neared, and though Grace tried to stay focused, cracks were forming. She found herself noticing things. Eric's subtle kindness, his restraint, the way he never brought up that night. It was as if he wanted to earn her trust without saying so. But trust, Grace knew, wasn't a luxury she could afford. One afternoon, while setting up a mock layout in the ballroom, Grace bent to adjust the floral centerpiece when her heels slipped slightly on the polished floor. Eric was there in a second, catching her elbow. Their eyes met, too close, too intense. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm fine," she answered quickly, stepping back. But his hand lingered a second longer than it should have, and in that moment, they both knew the line between them was thinning. One charged look, one step too close, and they'd fall into something neither could control. Grace turned away, heart hammering, and busied herself with her clipboard. Eric stood there for a beat longer, then exhaled slowly, knowing whatever storm had started the night they met wasn't over yet. Grace stepped out into the hallway, her heels echoing against the marble as the door clicked shut behind her. She should have felt relieved, walls re-erected, boundaries reinstated. But instead her chest felt hollow, as though something vital had been left behind in that quiet room, hanging in the air between unfinished truths and the ghost of someone named Elena. The following days were a blur of logistics and last-minute crises. The gala was less than a week away, and Grace buried herself in timelines, spreadsheets, and backup plans for every contingency short of an alien invasion. She barely spoke to Eric except in clipped exchanges or late-night email threads, their previous closeness now tucked away like a forbidden note in a drawer neither dared open. Still, something had shifted. She noticed it in the way he paused before saying her name, the slight hesitation as if tasting it differently now. She saw it in the way his hand would rest on the table longer after passing her a folder, or how his gaze lingered a moment too long when she wasn't looking directly at him, but always felt it. Then came the dress fitting. It wasn't meant to be dramatic, just a simple check-in at the boutique Hayes Corporation had hired for the team. But when Grace stepped out of the fitting room in a sleek midnight blue gown, elegant and powerful, and found Eric waiting, early, unexpectedly, she froze. He was mid-call, but his voice faltered. He stared. And for the first time since this entire spiral began, Grace didn't look away. Eric ended the call in a murmur and stepped toward her. The silence between them buzzed louder than traffic. "You look—" He stopped, searching for the right word. "Not beautiful, not stunning. Those were easy words. You look like you belong in a room no one else dares to enter." Grace blinked. "That's dramatic," she said, trying to deflect, but her voice was too soft to carry sarcasm. He stepped closer, only inches now. "Maybe, but it's true." She could smell his cologne, subtle, clean, the same scent that lingered on some of the memos he handed her. Everything in her screamed to back away, to say something sharp, something safe. Instead, she asked quietly, "Why do you keep doing this?" Eric's brow furrowed. "Doing what?" "This, showing up, saying things you shouldn't, making it harder to keep things professional." He looked at her, raw honesty written all over his face. "Because I stopped wanting professional the moment you walked into my office with that crooked coffee cup and told me the press release was trash." Grace laughed despite herself. She remembered that moment. She'd almost gotten fired. "You can't say things like that, Eric." "Why not?" "Because—" She hesitated then. "Because I might start believing you mean them." He leaned in, just enough that she could feel the electricity buzzing between them, but didn't touch her. "I do." They stood in suspended time until the boutique manager awkwardly cleared her throat. Grace stepped back first. "See you at the final walkthrough tomorrow," she said, her voice back in CEO assistant mode. But her fingers trembled as she gathered her things, and Eric didn't say a word. He just watched her walk away, like a man watching the storm he both feared and craved gather on the horizon. Grace left the office, and stepping into New York's chilly streets, a wave of emotions surged through her. She told herself to keep her distance, that Eric was a risk she couldn't afford. But his image, standing by the window, his voice breaking as he spoke of Elena, made it impossible to stay indifferent. Across the city, Eric sat in the empty office, staring at the spot Grace had left. For the first time, he admitted to himself that his feelings weren't because she resembled Elena. They were because she was Grace, the fierce, sharp woman challenging him to live again, even if he wasn't ready to name it. The air in the Midtown Hotel was stifling, despite the glittering crystal chandeliers and the soft piano music drifting through the banquet hall. With only 2 days until Hayes Corporation's annual gala, the Starline events team was in a frenzy, preparing for the final rehearsal. Grace Miller moved through the crowd of staff, checking every detail, from table placements to stage lighting, with a focus as sharp as a blade. But beneath her professional exterior, her heart was in turmoil. Over the past weeks, she'd tried to maintain her boundaries with Eric Hayes, but every glance, every word from him chipped away at the wall she'd built. Now she felt them on the verge of collapse. Eric, in a fitted black suit, stood in a corner of the room talking to a group of investors, but his eyes kept drifting to Grace. She wore a deep green business dress, her hair pulled up, every movement exuding the confidence he couldn't look away from. He knew he was losing control. His feelings for her, vivid, powerful, and entirely distinct from his memories of Elena, surged like a tidal wave, and he could no longer pretend they didn't exist. Tonight, he decided, he would tell her the truth, even if it risked everything. Grace, while directing the lighting crew, felt Eric's gaze. She tried to ignore it, focusing on her work. But every time she glanced at him, she saw the tension in him, the way his hands clenched, the way his jaw tightened when someone mentioned her. She knew he was struggling, and it scared her, not because of him, but because of herself. She'd let him slip into her mind, her heart, and that went against every rule she'd set. She didn't want to be Elena's stand-in. She didn't want to fill a void in his life. The rehearsal ended late. As New York City lights sparkled outside, the team trickled out, leaving Grace and Eric in the nearly empty banquet hall. She was reviewing the guest list on her tablet when Eric approached, his voice low but firm. "Grace, we need to talk." She froze, her heart racing. She knew this moment was coming, but she wasn't ready. "Now's not the time, Mr. Hayes," she replied, her voice stiff, eyes fixed on the screen. "I have work to do." "Grace, please," he said, stepping closer, his voice softened, almost pleading. "5 minutes." She took a deep breath, set the tablet down, and turned to face him. His gray eyes locked onto hers, brimming with emotions she didn't dare name. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms like a shield. "Talk." Eric hesitated, searching for words. He'd never felt this way, flustered, vulnerable, like a teenager facing a crush. "I know I was wrong that night at the villa. I shouldn't have done that. I mistook you for—" He stopped, unwilling to say Elena's name, unwilling to let the past intrude on this moment. "But these past weeks, working with you, I realized something. I don't see you as anyone else. I see you, Grace. And I love you." His confession hit like a blow, making Grace step back. She shook her head, emotions surging, anger, fear, and a pain she didn't want to acknowledge. "No," she cut in, her voice sharp as a knife. "You don't love me, Eric. You're chasing a ghost. You look at me and see her. Elena. I'm not her, and I'll never be her." Eric froze as if she'd slapped him. "That's not true," he protested, stepping closer. "I know you're not Elena. You're strong, sharp, witty. You're you. And that's why I—" But Grace raised a hand, stopping him. "Don't," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't do this. I can't be a substitute or whatever it is you're looking for. I have my self-respect, Eric." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she clenched her jaw, refusing to break. "I'll finish the gala, but after that, I want out of this project." Her words stabbed Eric's heart. He stood there watching her, feeling the ground crumble beneath him. "Grace, don't do this," he whispered, but she turned, striding out of the hall, leaving him alone in the dim light. "I can't trust you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't risk my heart for someone still haunted by the past." She turned, opened the door and walked out, leaving Eric alone in the empty room. As she left, her steps echoed down the hotel hallway, heavy with the weight of goodbye. Grace felt her heart tearing in two. She wanted to believe him, to run into his arms. But the fear of being hurt, of being Elena's shadow, was too great. Behind her, Eric stood frozen, watching her disappear. He knew he might lose her forever, and that pain was sharper than anything he'd ever felt. The Hay Corporation's annual gala unfolded like a dazzling dream. The Midtown Hotel's banquet hall shimmered with crystal chandeliers. Elegant gowns and tailored suits glided past one another to the gentle strains of jazz. Sponsors applauded as Eric Hayes took the stage. His speech was concise but magnetic, thanking the team that brought the event to life. But when he mentioned Starline events, his voice faltered. His eyes scanned the crowd for someone who wasn't there. Grace Miller had left as soon as she ensured everything was perfect, not staying for the praise or the spotlight she deserved. In her small Brooklyn apartment, Grace sat curled on the sofa, a glass of red wine in hand. She'd shed her business dress for a t-shirt and yoga pants, her hair loose and messy over her shoulders. The TV played a mindless show, but she wasn't really watching. Her mind churned with what had happened. Eric's confession, the pain in his eyes as she turned away. She'd done the right thing, she told herself. She couldn't risk a love so fraught with danger, not when she might only ever be Elena's shadow. But why even now did her heart ache at the thought of him? She sipped her wine, trying to banish the image of his gray eyes, but they clung to her like an unforgettable melody. Across the city, Eric stood alone on his office balcony, gazing at New York's twinkling lights. The gala was a triumph, yet he felt hollow. "You don't love me. You're chasing a ghost." Her words echoed in his mind, each one twisting the knife deeper. He hadn't pushed her away because he didn't love her, but because he hadn't proven that his love was real, unhaunted, unconditional. He gripped the railing, breathing in the cold air. He couldn't let her go forever, but this time he would do it differently. No impulsive moves, no pressure, just proof. Grace Miller, not Elena, was the woman he loved. In the days after the gala, Grace tried to return to normal. She took on a smaller project, avoided anything tied to Hayes Corporation. She met friends, sipped coffee in Williamsburg, even went on a date with a lawyer a friend set her up with. But nothing filled the void Eric left. She hated herself for it, hated that he lingered in her mind, hated that every time the doorbell rang, a tiny traitorous part of her hoped it was him. Eric, meanwhile, stayed out of sight. He knew she needed space, but that didn't mean he was idle. He began small, quiet gestures. One morning, Grace received a package at her office, a book on event planning with a handwritten note. "Thought you'd like this. You're better than anyone in this industry. E." Her heart raced. She folded the note and tucked it into a drawer, telling herself it was just a polite gesture. The next week, a bouquet of white tulips appeared at her apartment door. No name, but she knew. She brought them inside, set them on the kitchen table, and despite herself, smiled at their delicate scent. Eric didn't call, didn't text, didn't push for a response. He just left these small signs, quiet reminders. "I'm still here. Not for Elena, for you." Still, Grace held back. She wasn't ready. The fear still gripped her tight. She told herself the gestures were just guilt, not love. She needed proof, something undeniable, something real. The turning point came on a rainy evening, 3 weeks after the gala. Grace was working late, prepping for a small but important event in Connecticut. The office was empty, lit only by harsh neon overheads. Then her phone rang. It was Linda. Her voice was breathless, urgent. "Grace, we've got a huge problem. The truck carrying all the equipment crashed on the highway. The driver's fine, but the lights and sound system? Ruined." The event was tomorrow, no replacements. At 9 p.m., no one picked up her calls. Her chest tightened as she sank into her chair. Failure loomed. Then, the doorbell rang. She frowned. No one should be here this late. Opening the door, she froze. Eric Hayes stood in the rain. His black coat was soaked, hair plastered to his forehead, but his eyes lit up at the sight of her. Behind him, a small truck. Hayes Corporation emblazoned on the side. "Eric?" she stammered. "What are you doing here?" He stepped forward, calm and steady. "I heard about the crash. We have spare equipment. Lights, speakers, everything. It's in the truck. My team's here. We'll set it up tonight. Her jaw dropped. How did you even know? He smiled faintly, rain dripping from his lashes. I have friends in transportation. Word got to me fast. I know this project matters to you, Grace. He handed her a folder, a full equipment list and a loan agreement, flawlessly prepared. I'm not here to pressure you. I just want to help. For you. Grace stared at the folder, her hands trembling. Why, Eric? Her voice broke. Why are you doing all this? He looked her straight in the eye. Because I love you, Grace. Not because you remind me of anyone. Not because of the past. Because you're you. The strong, brilliant woman who makes me want to be a better man. I know I messed up, but I won't stop trying to prove this is real. His words blew through her like a storm, but before she could reply, an explosion. They turned. Smoke billowed from the Hayes truck. An employee burst in. Mr. Hayes, the truck's short-circuited. It might catch fire. Without hesitation, Eric ran into the storm. Cut the power. Grab the extinguishers. Grace followed, heart pounding. She watched him climb onto the truck, helping crew members drag gear away from the flames. Rain poured. Smoke swirled. A fire extinguisher hissed. After 10 tense minutes, the fire was out. Eric stood soaked, soot-smudged, panting, but his eyes were resolute. Grace stared at him, her chest aching. He hadn't just brought equipment. He'd risked himself. For her. She stepped closer, her voice shaking. Eric, you're insane. You could have gotten hurt. He gave a weak smile. I'd rather get hurt than let you down, Grace. A pause, then. I know you need time. I'll wait as long as it takes. But I won't stop proving that I love you. Not Elena. You. Her eyes burned. Not from the rain. She couldn't speak. She only nodded, turned away, tears streaming silently. Eric didn't push. He didn't ask for an answer. He just watched her go, knowing he'd planted a seed of hope. Back at her apartment, Grace sat at her kitchen table, clutching the white tulips. For the first time, she let herself think of Eric. Not with fear, but with a flicker of hope. She wasn't ready yet. Not completely. She needed time. Time to trust him. Time to trust herself. Across the city, Eric stood in his office, gazing over New York's skyline, feeling like he just climbed out of the deepest valley. The path ahead was still steep, but for the first time, he believed he had a real chance. Not to replace Elena, but to build something honest with Grace. 3 weeks had passed since that rainy night when Eric Hayes braved a storm to save Grace Miller's project. Since he proved his love wasn't just words, it was action. New York had slipped into early summer. The air grew warmer, scented with wisteria drifting from the parks. Grace tried to resume her routine at Starline events, but each day brought the quiet realization. She couldn't ignore what Eric had done, not just the tulips or the handwritten note tucked in the book. Not even the equipment he'd rushed in to save her work. It was the way he looked at her, eyes filled with patience, sincerity, and the kind of quiet promise that said he would wait forever if he had to. She still kept her distance, but the wall she'd built around her heart had crumbled, leaving only slivers of fear and pride. Then one Saturday afternoon, as Grace tidied her desk, a cream-colored envelope slid under her office door. She frowned, picking it up. No sender's name. Just an address she knew too well. Villa 9, Greenwich, Connecticut, where it all began. Inside was a single card. Eric's familiar handwriting filled the page. Grace, I'm hosting a small gathering at the villa tomorrow night. No work, no pressure. I just want to see you. If you're ready, I'll be waiting. Eric. She read it again and again. Her fingers traced his words. Her heart thudded in her chest. It wasn't just an invitation. It was a doorway. To him. To herself. To everything she'd tried to outrun. That evening, Grace stood before her mirror in an emerald silk dress, her hair cascading softly over her shoulders. She didn't know what she was doing, only that she couldn't keep running. The drive to Greenwich was quiet. A light rain shimmered beneath the streetlights, echoing the storm from that night weeks ago. But this time, there was no fury, no confusion, only hope. however faint. Villa 9 emerged through the mist, its windows glowing with warm, golden light. She stepped onto the stone path, her heels tapping gently. Before she could knock, the door opened. Eric stood there, white shirt, black trousers, a single red rose in hand. The sharp-edged CEO was gone. In his place stood a man who looked at her as if she were the answer to every question he'd ever asked. "Grace," he said softly, eyes lighting up. "You came." She smiled, though her heart raced. "I couldn't say no to a handwritten invite," she teased, but her gaze stayed steady on him. He laughed gently, offering her the rose. "I was hoping you wouldn't." He led her inside, and this time the villa wasn't cold or haunted. The living room flickered with candlelight. A fire crackled gently. A modest dinner was set on the table, but no guests. "No party?" she asked, raising a brow. Eric shrugged, a glint in his eye. "I stretched the truth a little. I just wanted you here. No work, no noise. Just you." She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in his presence. The feeling was light, like a breeze rustling through a long-closed window. They ate by candlelight, talking easily, about favorite coffee shops in the city, the comedy that left Grayson in stitches, the time Eric nearly burned his kitchen. But as dinner ended, a hush fell over the room. The moment loomed like a precipice. Eric stood, walking to the large window overlooking the rain-drenched garden. Grace followed, keeping a few steps of space between them. "Grace," he began, voice low, not turning. "I was wrong that night. When I saw Elena in you, I let the past distort what was right in front of me. But you're not her. You're Grace. Strong, brilliant, witty. The woman who made me laugh again after 2 years. The only one I want. Not because you remind me of someone else, but because you're you." Her chest tightened. Tears welled but stayed unfallen. She stepped closer. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm scared I'm just a piece of your past, something you're clinging to. How do I know this is real?" Eric turned then, his eyes burning with resolve. "Because every day since that night, I've tried to show you. I didn't bring her here, Grace. When I gave you flowers, helped your project, stood in the rain, I wasn't thinking of her. I was thinking of you. The way you challenge me, the way you work like the world depends on it, the way you make me want to be better." He stepped closer, so near she could feel his breath. "I love you, Grace Miller. Only you." She searched his face and found no trace of deceit, just honesty, and a depth she hadn't dared hope for. Her breath trembled. "I'm scared too, Eric. But I love you." He froze, eyes wide in disbelief, then smiled, a smile that broke through every shadow. Gently, reverently, he reached up and touched her cheek. "Can I kiss you?" Grace laughed through her tears. "You still have to ask?" She pulled him close, and under the starry New York sky, shimmering through the rain-washed windows, they kissed. Not desperately, not hurried, but like a vow, a beginning. Grace felt her heart open fully for the first time. No shadows, no ghosts. Just her strength entwined with Eric's healing heart. Two puzzle pieces finally falling into place. 3 months later, Grace and Eric stood in a small gallery on the Lower East Side, hosting a charity event for underprivileged children. It wasn't the Hayes Corporation Gala, but it mattered more. Grace, in a beige business dress, directed the team with grace and confidence. This time, she wasn't alone. Eric, sleeves rolled up, coffee cup in hand, helped arrange chairs, joked with sponsors, and brewed coffee for volunteers at midnight. They worked like a team, stolen glances, quiet touches, smiles that held entire conversations. At the night's end, Grace stepped on stage. Her voice trembled slightly but held steady. "Thank you all for being here. This event isn't just about raising funds. It's about giving hope. And I know a little about hope, thanks to someone who taught me that sometimes you have to take a risk to find it." She looked at Eric, and he looked at her as if she'd hung the stars. Later, after the guests had left, they stayed behind to clean up, racing to stack chairs like mischievous teenagers. "You killed it, Miller," Eric said, pulling her into his arms. "I had a decent partner," she replied, resting her head on his chest. "But next time, You're letting me win the chair-stacking race?" He laughed, kissing her forehead. They returned to Villa 9 one weekend, not for a party, but to make it a home. With Grace's help, Eric cleared the rooms once shrouded in memory. They added photos, weekend trips, quiet dinners, laughter. Elena's picture was gently stored in a box, not to forget, but to honor and to move forward. One evening they sat by the fireplace, Grace curled against Eric's side with a book in hand. "You know," she murmured, "I used to think this villa was the worst place in the world." Eric turned, lifting an eyebrow. "And now?" She smiled up at him. "Now it's where I found you." He kissed her. And the villa, once a place of sorrow, now pulsed with warmth and hope. No grand vows, no scripted lines. Just love. True, steady, unafraid. And the quiet promise that, no matter what storms came, they would always choose each other.